I'll never stop fighting to protect Ontario. If these tariffs proceed, Canada should respond tariff to tariff, tariff for tariff, dollar for dollar.
US President Donald Trump just issued a massive trade threat. 3 new proclamations hit Ottawa without warning. A 50% tariff targets Canadian goods under CUSMA. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is already striking back. Canada is refusing to yield to Washington. Less than 24 hours ago, leaders from Canada, the United States, and Mexico stood side by side on stage presenting World Cup awards in a public display of North American unity. But behind closed doors in Washington, a completely different strategy was taking shape. In a sudden briefing delivered moments before public release, White House officials announced 3 proclamations signed by U.S. President Donald Trump. These measures impose a 50% tariff on goods protected under the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, including cement, dairy, hockey sticks, Canadian wine, and liquor. Washington claims this action is taken under Section 338 of the US Tariff Act. The White House insists it is responding to Canadian provincial decisions that removed American alcohol from store shelves, as well as ongoing disputes over dairy supply management. If you are finding this coverage valuable, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others. It genuinely helps us bring you this reporting. To everyone who has been following these trade developments with us, thank you for your continued support. Before we examine the full breakdown, we want to hear your perspective. Do you think Ontario Premier Doug Ford is right to demand dollar-for-dollar tariff retaliation, or should Canada focus entirely on negotiations during this 30-day window? Let us know in the comments below. The economic details emerging from Washington reveal a sweeping campaign designed to squeeze key sectors of the Canadian economy. Trump administration officials held a rapid briefing with journalists right before publishing 3 distinct memorandums. These documents span 18 to 20 pages and impact thousands of product lines that previously moved across the border tariff-free under CUSMA. The administration is invoking Section 338 of the US Tariff Act, a legal provision that allows Washington to penalize foreign nations it accuses of discriminating against American commerce. Washington claims these 50% tariffs are merely retaliation against Canadian provincial trade responses. But Canadian industry leaders are exposing the flaw in that White House narrative. Washington is trying to frame this 50% tax as defensive, but Canadian stakeholders see right through it.
Trump administration officials held a phone call briefing with journalists moments before the publication of 3 proclamations by the U.S. president imposing a 50% tariff on goods that are covered, as you pointed out, by the existing U.S.-Canada-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, CUSMA, goods that include hockey sticks, cement, dairy, Canadian wine, and other liquor, and officials said that this is retaliation to Canadian retaliations.
Flavio Volpe, head of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, directly rejected the White House justification. He pointed out that Canadian actions were defensive responses to unsolicited American tariffs that came out of nowhere. Volpe emphasized that standing up to Washington is the only language this administration understands. Meanwhile, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is urging strategic action during the mandatory countdown. President Candace Laing stated that business leaders knew this trade fight would become bumpier before reaching a final landing. She emphasized that both nations must utilize the 30-day window before tariffs take effect to engage in meaningful formal talks that strengthen shared prosperity rather than threaten it. Canadian manufacturing leaders are standing firm, confirming that Ottawa was right to retaliate against original U.S. pressure.
Those were Canadian responses to American discrimination that was unsolicited, that came out of nowhere. And part of the reaction to this is the Canadians saying, what did we do wrong? Canadian government saying, what did we do wrong? Well, this just really comes back to a year delay of, hey, we didn't like that you stood up to us. You know, I think we did the right thing by retaliating. This is what gets them to respond. This is how that government works.
This announcement comes at a critical geopolitical moment. US and Mexico bilateral trade talks are resuming in Mexico tomorrow, creating a sharp contrast with Canada's situation. CBC senior Washington reporter Katie Nicholson noted that while Washington displays progress with Mexico, it is applying maximal pressure tactics against Canada. By targeting sectors like provincial alcohol sales and dairy supply management, Washington is attempting to force concessions before formal bilateral negotiation tables open. CBC senior parliamentary reporter J.P. Tasker noted that these new measures target sectors already under immense economic pressure. The auto manufacturing sector in particular has seen vital business investment sitting on the sidelines due to persistent U.S. tariff threats. Hours later, Canadian political leadership made its stance crystal clear. Ontario Premier Doug Ford voiced fierce opposition to the White House threats, refusing to compromise on provincial protections or withdraw restrictions on American alcohol. Ford declared that he will never stop fighting to protect Ontario. He insisted that if these 50% tariffs proceed in 30 days, Canada must respond tariff for tariff and dollar for dollar. This trade shock hit as all of Canada's provincial premiers gathered on Prince Edward Island for scheduled summit meetings. What was meant to be a broader agenda immediately shifted to mounting a unified national defense against U.S. economic pressure. Washington is attempting to use split-screen tactics to isolate Canada, but Canadian leadership is standing together.
On your question on timing, this announcement, it drops on the eve of the U.S. and Mexico's bilateral trade talks resuming. That's tomorrow in Mexico. And that's creating this sharp contrast, right, to any kind of public or official bilateral CUSMA negotiations between the U.S. and Canada. The needle simply doesn't appear to be moving forward at any kind of the same similar capacity, even though, yes, we are told there are calls and officials are in frequent contact. So this announcement just now of these sweeping tariffs without the usual carve-outs for CUSMA, it's a show of force, perhaps, from the U.S., a little bit of a Trumpian art of the deal, maximal pressure tactics, specifically here on things that we have seen and we know have irked American negotiators, things like the supply management for dairy and how some provinces yanked American alcohol off shelves. And it's telegraphing, Ian, and this is just my own sort of note on the potential optics here. It's kind of like it's creating this good cop, bad cop message or a split screen. Look how well things are going with Mexico.
What we are witnessing is a textbook application of trade negotiation pressure. By invoking Section 338 and setting a 30-day clock, U.S. President Donald Trump is attempting to create leverage over Canadian industries. However, Washington's strategy faces a major obstacle. Rather than fracturing Canadian resolve, these aggressive tactics are uniting Canadian political leaders and business organizations. Premier Doug Ford's call for dollar-for-dollar matching tariffs reflects a national consensus that backing down only invites further pressure. Industry leaders like Flavio Volpe recognize that Canada's initial retaliatory measures were justified and necessary. As provincial premiers coordinate their strategy on Prince Edward Island, Canada is demonstrating that it will not be intimidated into sacrificing key economic protections like supply management. The next 30 days will test whether Washington's pressure tactics can break Canadian unity or whether Ottawa's firm stance will force a fair resolution under CUSMA. Today's development proves that Canada is prepared to defend its economic sovereignty against any external trade pressure. If you found this analysis insightful, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to stay informed. Drop your thoughts on Canada's trade response in the comments below. Canada is standing its ground, and we will continue covering every moment.